Ah, shit! You listen to the James McMahon Music Podcast. I'm your host, James McMahon, and this is a Spook Media production.
My personal, I can't speak on behalf of the government. I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
So I interviewed Tom DeLonge, formerly of Blink-182 and now Angels Airwaves, for a magazine feature I'm doing. The latter have a new album due imminently called Lifeforms. It's very good, less proggy than they've been on their 5 albums prior. More pop, more punk. But Tom is also one of the most prominent names in ufology. His aerospace, science and entertainment company To The Stars is arguably the tumbling boulder that has led to a conversation about UFOs, or UAPs, as they appear to be rebranded, in an attempt to remove some of the stigma of what's long been viewed as pseudoscience in the mainstream, in a way that is quite unlike anything I've witnessed in my lifetime so far. I'm fascinated by that stuff. UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, the unexplained. I've written about it a fair bit myself, and I've always been inspired by the way Tom has poked his fingers into pies, made his passions his existence, and I've always wanted to interview him. I did keep most of our interview for that forthcoming magazine feature, but there was enough elsewhere that I can share here now. As a fan of your music and of ufology, I've wanted to speak to you for forever, really.
Wow. Thanks, man.
Looking forward to it. Let's jump in with the records, because I've been playing that a lot today. I was reading that it was almost 3 years in the making. Is that right?
Yeah. You know, I don't have much time. So my car just turned on, by the way. Sorry about the beeping. I don't have much time, you know, so when I wanted to do more music, I was very much like, you know, I better start early and I better like really take like the little few moments I have each week. I was thinking that potentially we would like kind of do it off and on for about a year or so and then be cool and we got a record, but then the pandemic hit and I was like, well, I guess we have more time. Let's keep working on it. And we went out on tour right before that. And I was like super inspired. I was like, wow, we got all these fans. So it ended up being like a 3-year journey. But it's really just because of the world shutting down and affording us the time to do that.
I was quite surprised, actually. I found the record quite disarming. I thought I knew what Angels and Airwaves were, but it kind of sounds like the man who was in Blink-182, the record that he would be making at this point in his life if Angels and Airwaves had never happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know, it does. I really love that you're saying that because I really felt more comfortable. I felt the most comfortable as a songwriter, you know, than I've ever felt on this record, and the most challenged, but I find comfort in that because I kind of know where I'm going, what I'm trying to achieve, how I'm trying to push myself. And I also felt more comfortable with who I am more than ever, because what I did when I started Angels and Airwaves, I knew it was going to be a while before people understood why this band was all about love and consciousness and self-awareness and stuff. These are kind of spiritual elements, you know, that people probably weren't expecting me to even discuss. Then I got into all the UFO stuff and everyone was like, he's crazy, he lost his mind, you know, and then all that got validated and they find out that I kind of know what I'm talking about with that stuff and I'm not crazy or whatever. So I go out on tour and I just go, you know what, like it's time to bring back a lot of the ridiculous like parts of my personality that still exist. And so we got a lot of humor involved with the band for the first time. So it's like all of a sudden I felt like very comfortable in my own skin. So doing this record was just like, I just feel like it's a very clear representation of everything I've done and been into, and kind of honoring bands like The Cure, honoring bands like Depeche Mode, honoring, you know, like what I discovered in Boxcar Racer or post-punk and hardcore punk stuff that I was into growing up, still into it now, you know? So it's kind of like, you know, got it all for me here. And I appreciate what you said. That was a long answer. Sorry.
I think that we're both on exactly the same page, to be honest. I wondered though, because I've been reading quite a lot about Monsters of California, and that is obviously riffing on almost sort of, you know, kind of young skate punks, sort of suburban skate punks. I wondered whether almost kind of, I would imagine that you're drawing on a lot of your own experiences there, and I wondered whether it was spending some time in that headspace that had almost kind of brought you back a little bit to almost kind of a bit more of a SoCal kind of pop punk kind of sound.
Yeah, it did. So when I was making, Monsters California, setting it up, getting ready to go film that, like we just did, when we were making the record, I was very much immersed in who I was when I was like 18 years old. Like how did we talk? Like what was the ways we talked to each other? We talked about life, the things we were worried about, the things we were chasing. I was always chasing, things in the paranormal, because I just knew there was a lot more to existence than we want to acknowledge all the time. And so it became like a way for me to get my mind off the competitive nature of the music industry and wondering if I should go to college or wondering like what I should do with my life. So I've always kind of been into that for that reason. But yeah, getting immersed in that for months and months and months, if not a few years before that, just working on the story. It's like, yeah, I'm just absolutely remembering who I was. Even on the movie set, I was telling stories every single day to the crew about all the mischief we got into when Blink was first created, and because we were just a group of skateboarders, and it just kind of was born out of just being rebellious youth.
So I guess I'm going to try and kind of keep some semblance of narrative to what I want to ask you, but if this jumps around a bit, then forgive me. There's a lot I'm trying to cover. I guess that you were saying before how when you obviously kind of an interest in the unexplained and the unknown has been with you for most, for all your life. I guess I'm a little bit interested in when that first reared its head.
It started when I was in junior high, when I read a book on the paranormal at school, in the school library, because I didn't want to read any of the other fucking books. I was like, they made me go to the library because I had like an hour where maybe I finished a test or something and I had to leave the room, and they said, you can go hang out in the library for the rest of the hour. And I was like, well, what am I going to read? And they were forcing me to go read a book. And I was like, well, no, I don't want to read a book. Books are stupid. I'm in 7th grade. But then I saw this one that had I think it had like the Loch Ness Monster on it and like a UFO or something. It was some weird book that just had weird stuff in it. Oh, this is interesting. It's the only book I want to read in here. And then I got into it. I was reading it. I was like, wow, this is cool. Then it wasn't until later when like we were doing like touring in a van and we didn't have phones and DVDs and things to watch, so you buy books when you're laying in the van for a 9-hour drive. And I started buying these books that had incredible amounts of detail and, historical evidence and encounters and government documents and presidents, Apollo astronaut, everyone talking about this stuff to do with unidentified aerial phenomena. And at that point, I was like completely sold, because I had no idea that all this stuff has been going back to the 40s and the government was so involved. We always forget. We always think that like they're just discovering that it's real. And no, they've had about 50 programs that most of which have been declassified to some degree to where they existed, but most people kind of forget that. So I went deep down the rabbit hole when Blink was first touring. That's when I started getting like kind of obsessed with it.
When you almost kind of came out, so to speak, you were almost kind of implying that there was a degree of ridicule. Did that hurt?
That's a good question. I hurt wouldn't be the word. I was frustrated because I knew what was happening. I knew that this was a really, really, really big deal, that I got people to come and support kind of this idea I had to open up the great discussion, and the beginnings of it, I never really, I was so deep in it that I never really put 2 and 2 together to realize that like, what, this is going to sound wild to people, that it's me, and that I have something of this important to say that other people want to be said. And I remember afterwards looking back on, it makes perfect sense why people didn't really think that I was coherent, totally clear and like clear-headed. But I'm sitting there having these discussions, and it's taking over me in totality, because I finally got brought into discussions that I've been waiting 20 years to have, that I never thought that I would be able to ever have, So it was weird. So I was frustrated. I didn't care at all if people believe me or not, because by this point we were like up and rolling, and it was a big deal, and I knew what was coming.
One of the things that I think has been really interesting about the work that you've done in this field is that you haven't associated with cranks, the people who Louisa Alzon. I always get the name wrong.
Yeah, Elizondo.
Alzondo. Yeah. When I started listening to interviews with him there's a podcast I listen to called That UFO Podcast. That's my little plug there. That guy has such credibility. You know, like this isn't Alex Jones or someone. You know, like this is someone.
Yeah.
And you associated with those people almost from the off. And I guess I wondered, much like the world probably thought, oh, it's that guy who used to run around in the late 90s, you know, with his tackle out, playing pop punk. How did you come to meet these, you know, heavyweights?
Well, I mean, there is a whole story that I'm hoping to be able to tell one day when I'm kind of given the permission to tell it. But some of the cliff notes, the macro brushstrokes are, I came into a group of, I worked really hard to get connected to a group of what I call advisors that were high ranking, flag officers, former officers, people that were still very much connected, but had a little bit more freedom to discuss things, So I came into contact with this group and I got a lot of support from them. And then when I came out with my first book, Secret Machines, and I started discussing this stuff, there were other people from other places that thought that I was being given very, very classified information. The truth of it was more that I think I figured out some very sensitive things just on my own. And, there wasn't a need or a cause for some huge alarm that I was trying to spill government secrets like Ed Snowden or something. But because I knew what I was talking about and the things I was saying, really, it caused all these other people to come around me and first kind of try to make sure that everything was on the up and up. And then the second was like, well, is there a better version of all this? And we created To the Stars Academy to do this in a better way rather than just me kind of shooting from the hip, which is kind of what I was doing, at the time, because it was just me at the time as a mouthpiece. But now it holds much more weight because my company was founded with one of the senior spies at the CIA, Senior Intelligence Service, which is like the top management of the CIA. And then the physicist, Nobel nominee, head of the UFO program and the CIA's the psychic spy program, remote viewing. And then we brought Lou over, who ran the program at the Pentagon. And then we brought his day-to-day director, scientist, biologist, and then a bunch of other people from the agency, CIA, DOD. I mean, the whole company was like jam-packed with like all these people, even Chris Mellon being Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and, on the committees, the Senate Intelligence Committee and all that stuff as a staff director. And I mean, these are like real deal guys.
Obviously, there was the disclosures this summer, but it does feel a little bit like the mainstream is starting to maybe take this more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we did. I mean, that literally was a plan, a strategy, something we executed on a day-to-day level. And what we had to do was break the stories about the program, the videos that existed, brought those out. New York Times went out, did all the press, started a unscripted series about the program and everything that was going on, and all of our work at the same time. We were getting and setting up all the briefings at the Senate and Congress. We did briefings at the top levels of the CIA and the Director of National Intelligence or the Office of the ODNI, and even the White House. We were involved in helping set up, bringing the people from the task force, from the various programs, and connecting them to elected officials, which was a big deal because the fact that all my guys were able to bring these people out of the basement and basically bypass the bureaucratic rank above them that would have stopped it, we were able to just call up the senators themselves and just be like, you need to meet with this guy now. So that then the boss didn't really have a way to shut it down. If the senators know about it, they can call you in and it's a big deal. And that's what's been happening. And so now the stigma's gone. So we did all of this to release the stigma. And so I was talking to the head of the task force, the previous head of the UFO task force, and he was saying, I asked him, what's the biggest change? And he goes, now that we can talk about UFOs in the halls of the Pentagon for the first time ever. Up until now, it's always been in a skiff. I mean, one of the guys on my scientific advisory board, it was chief information officer of the White House, National Reconnaissance Office and all the communication systems. and everything from the Air Force One, White House, to like anything in the executive branch. And so it's a big deal. It's a big position. 1,200 people work for him. It's all highly top secret stuff. But he's like, UFOs are only ever discussed in a SCIF, secure facility. He's like, I can't believe that we're having these discussions right now. I just can't believe it.
I mean, where do you think it goes now? I guess what I was thinking was that if you were a member of like the military and you had seen things, you might have felt like you couldn't talk about that for fear of ridicule, or, as you were saying, like a stigma to it. Do you feel like more people will talk within the military now, or within those realms? Like, I guess what I'm interested in is that where do you see we're at in 5 years' time?
A lot of what we did was inspire like the needs of real accountability and oversight of the data associated with this stuff. Creating reporting mechanisms for all the pilots and all the people in the armed services to report up a direct channel that goes to what they call a 3-star and above. So even if you're civilian, they kind of rank you the same way as a military. Like you can be a senior executive service, SES 3 or something, is the same thing as a 3-star general. But the idea is that when you get to those levels, those ranks mean a lot because it gives you budgetary authority. It gives you kind of the latitude to kind of direct money and programs and the needs of national security. It has to be law. So there has to be literally legislation written down dictating that UFO reports need to go up to this office in this way and so on. But that won't happen until it's literally written down in the annual appropriations, defense appropriations budget, where it dictates where the money goes and so on. Like it's just the way it works. Like you could say, hey, send me UFO reports to this office, but they won't until there's like a budget and a line item and it's like written down into the bureaucracy of how to do it,
Yeah.
So now that that's happening, and they're now starting to talk about a permanent office like a Homeland Security or Central Intelligence Agency, but a permanent office for this subject. And if that passes, that's a big deal. Now you're going to have a multi-billion dollar funded arm of the government that literally just deals with this subject. And that's where I think things can change. I also think that the government, now that they're talking about this and they're saying this stuff, I think that it's going to start trickling out in a really big way over the next few years.
One of the things I've heard in a lot of the conversations about ufology is whether the populace could handle a disclosure. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they can handle it. I think that there's elements of it that probably would be very hard to handle, and maybe a lot of people can't, but I don't think that's the stuff that needs to come first. It's kind of like telling your kids that terrorists exist, but you don't need to necessarily tell them about people's heads getting chopped off or something. But later on, once you understand a little bit more about the world, our capabilities, what we do about it, we know how to stop the bad guys. Then it's like you can handle the conversations of what the bad guys do. I think with the UFO subject, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of national security issues. And there's a lot of things that come along with the subject that are pretty wild and unnerving. And I think, it just has to, like anything else, it's got to be discussed in a way that people can absorb the information. They don't just freak out, because the reality is people freak out about anything. Like it rains in San Diego, people start getting into car crashes and not moving and freezing on the intersection. It takes very little for people to trip up their daily life.
I mean, I sometimes think about COVID, and I think if on one hand, COVID really rammed home to me that the world can change in an instant. But at the same time, I guess where I'm at now is it's maybe made me think that the world can't handle that as well as maybe I thought they could.
I agree. But I also think it was really pretty amazing how they came out with these vaccines within a year. I mean, that's especially a new technology, the RNA one. So I think in some respects, it's kind of rad to see how everyone worked together finally, sharing information and trying to figure out how best to solve a problem that's hitting the world equally. So yeah, there's good and bad, and pandemic sucked and just wreaked so much havoc on some people's lives, but I try to be a little bit of an optimist as much as I can, and I go, well, we did pull off some cool stuff too.
I mean, obviously you've come to this interest from a place of, reading a book with a UFO on the cover as a kid. I think one of the challenges I've had in my own investigations into my interest in it is trying to almost kind of like distill the sci-fi from my interest, in the sense that one of the things that infuriates me about ufology is when someone will say, well, they're obviously the species from the planet, and you're like, well, you don't know that.
Yeah, totally.
It could just as easily be like a superpower with a technology that we don't know about. And that's interesting in itself, but have you found that difficult? Because you came to this as someone who was interested in, little green men.
Yeah, like at first when you get into the subject, it's easy to believe everything you read. Then if you do it for enough years, you start to realize that you don't really know much of can't verify so much of this. So you kind of move into like, where are the patterns? Like if I listen to someone that says they were abducted by aliens, and those aliens came in and jumped on your chest, looked you in the eyes, and you felt paralyzed, and then you felt like you're falling backwards through a limitless abyss. That's things that they say. Now, if I read that, that's crazy. Now, if I read that same exact thing from somebody else in China that was written down 40 years ago, I would be like, interesting. That's an interesting pattern. These people don't know each other. They're decades apart, different continents. This is a pattern worth categorizing as, put a pin in it and let's like keep a note there. So it's much more about patterns for me. And you're also dealing with consciousness. So it kind of gets tricky because people all have they see different things, but the patterns seem to be the same. And then you start to wonder, are these technologies to confuse us, or what's really happening, and so on? You don't know. So you got to stick to, like, again, the things that keep popping up over and over again, and stick away from the weird shit that only one person is saying. Yeah, they're from this weird planet and they're here to save our oceans. Okay, great. But I haven't heard that anywhere else, so I don't really know what to do with that right now. It's interesting. The universe is potentially infinite, so that means there's kind of infinite possibility too. If there's no end, then there's really no end to what's going on, and so you never know. Are the good ones or the bad ones? Are they here for empire building and resource extraction, or are they here for some other purpose where they're feeding off the energy of our emotions? There's so many options here on the table. It's kind of an unending study. This is like saying, hey, we're studying the Amazon and we know everything about it. And then every year they keep finding 1,000 new species of birds and stuff down there and plants. And you're like, I guess there's no real end to what we can learn because it's constantly evolving.
I get the impression, like a lot of people when they talk about, a lot of people who've had access to information within this field, that there is a constant, I can't say this right now, I can say this right now. Like, you almost have you're almost policing your own flow of information of what you know. I imagine that's quite exhausting. I imagine that's almost even a bit frightening sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't do it right, all the time. I'm in a tricky situation because I'm a communicator, but all my partners at my company, and so they all have their security clearances, and they have security clearances where they get polygraphed. I mean, and I just because I happen to know something doesn't mean they told me that, but it comes off that way if I don't watch what I say. Like, I don't want to ever put out this idea that they're giving me classified info, because they're not. It's just I happen to know some of the sensitive aspects of what our country is doing with this subject and what's going on with this subject. So it puts me in a tricky situation sometimes where I'm like, oh, I can't necessarily talk or discuss this in the way I naturally would. I have to be a little bit more thoughtful about it.
I mean, obviously, during your time in Blink, you was such an important band for very zeitgeisty. There are people of a generation that Blink wanted to matter hugely to. At the same time, you have done so much creative and intellectual flexing since you haven't been. See, I never really ever view you as someone who isn't a member of that band. I view you as someone who isn't in that band right now. And I guess, did you feel constrained within that band? Because it does feel like right now you are doing everything that you've ever wanted to do.
It's a good question. I felt constrained, but not because I think they wanted to constrain me. I think we were a bit immature, the three of us, at least emotionally, to be able to communicate properly. Where I want to do all these things, they might have thought that I was trying to go do it on my own. I didn't care about the band or something. Or I might have thought that they're trying. It's just ego driven stuff. Like, you want to do your thing, what about us? And I'm like, I want to do my thing. Why are you guys trying to like stop it? But at the end of the day, we would have all done it together. Should we have been like at the age we are now or something, like more like have a much better emotional intelligence to handle that type of a situation where there's a lot of fame and ego and money and all that weird stuff that doesn't even matter, because at the end of the day, you're just boys just trying to figure it out. That's why baseball teams in America get in fist fights halfway through the season. They're all pros making $300 million contracts, but then they just still get into fist fights because they're boys, but I think like at the end of the day though, with Blink, it's like that. Like, we've kind of proven that we're capable of anything. We've done incredible things on our own and incredible things together. And, but for me, I've always wanted to, I don't do things for the fame and the money. I really don't, obviously. Like, I do things that where my heart is, if I can try to make the world a better place through the way I see it and communicating it. But I'm kind of wild and I'm all over the map. So people don't really understand me a lot of the time. And I say crazy things, but I usually say them for good reason normally. And now people are starting to realize that, wow, maybe he is more clever than we thought. And maybe he isn't crazy. And wow, he's doing some cool shit. And that's kind of, I just want to live in a zone where people understand who I am and they consider the art that I'm creating because it's coming from a good place and it might be worth their time sometimes. And other than that, I'm just as God made me, like in Spinal Tap, but that's a line of Spinal Tap. I always love that line, just as God made me.
That's a good place to wrap things up. I wanted to ask though, obviously Mark's going through some stuff. Have you heard from him?
Oh yeah. Yes, we talk all the time. He's doing well. The treatment, he responded super good to the treatment. He's got to do another scan to make sure it's all cool here shortly. But he's doing well. He's healing. It's been a super rough few months for him. But the fact that it seemed to have eaten away all of his cancer, like all of it, is like everyone's holding their breath going, you've got to be kidding me. That's like miraculous. So we're all sending him amazing love and good energy and hope to get him up and running around and traveling the world here soon.
I'm rooting for him, man. Thanks so much for your time, Tom. That was wonderful.
Hey, thank you. And I loved all your questions. And I really appreciate it. I think you're going to love the Monsters movie, and hopefully we can meet up together sometime, and I'll talk to you in the future, hopefully, as well.
Well, that's episode 13. Thanks to Tom for the chat. Thanks to Hayley Connolly for setting it up. The theme tune is by the band Jobbers. And I'll see you next time.
You want us to go to Dallas?
Yeehaw! Actually, a town called Cheney, about 50 miles south of there, population 361. By all accounts, very rustic and charming, but as of late, ground zero, the locus for a series of mysterious nocturnal exsanguination.